Next up is a good friend of mine by the name of David Driscoll. David and I worked together years ago on a very advanced, ahead of its time thing, and we'll just call it platform for lack of a better word. But that platform was very awesome. And during that time, David took me out of the world of being a dark matter developer and started to enlighten me on different things that I had never seen before. So I just wanted to go ahead and present David Driscoll, a functional guru, JavaScript guru. He works on the OmniSharp project, which is some of the technology that gets you C# Intellisense in VS Code. So David, it's all you.
You're assuming I'm paying attention.
Right, and that you know how to unhardware mute.
Yeah, right. So what I'm going to be talking to you guys today about, and thank you for everyone that's hung around since the beginning. I'm sure with various time zones that people have been in and out. So appreciate that. So I'm going to talk today about dynamic data, but not just dynamic data in the .NET sense, but more of the, how can we use dynamic data elsewhere? When Rodney first exposed me to dynamic data, he's like, you should really look at this. And that actually took quite a while for me to actually listen to him. So once I finally did, I'm like, hey, that thing's really cool. And so I'm going to talk to you about that. I basically took the source cache and all the stuff around it from .NET and rewrote it in TypeScript using RxJS. So myself, Rodney already introduced me. I'm the team lead for OmniSharp, so that's the C# Intellisense for VS Code. Yes, I know there's issues there. We're working on them. I'm also a senior software developer at a company called TrailCard and a Microsoft MVP. My Twitter and GitHub are there, so please feel free to catch me on either of those platforms if you have questions. So I'm gonna, this whole talk's been a lot about reactive extensions already, so just gonna give a sort of brief idea. Observables are push-based collections, right? So if I have an enumerable or an array and someone wants to get all the items out of an array, they pull them, right? The consumer is the person that owns it. Observables flip that in the direction. So instead of a consumer, it's the producer that says I have a thing for you, I have a thing for you. It might be 0, 1, or it could be infinite values. It could never stop. And then Rx, since it was developed on .NET, has expanded. So you got the JavaScript, Java, Swift, Go. There's a whole bunch of them out there now. And then dynamic data. The best way I look at it is it allows you to use observables and treat them as if they were a collection. You can sort of ignore the fact that it's a collection over time. You can get an instantaneous snapshot of exactly what's happening there. And hopefully my microphone is mixing up most of the noise. If there is any problems or you miss something, please feel free. I'm looking at chat as well. So you can model complex objects from an observable. You can take this collection of things and produce other values, like was talked about earlier, right? You can say, what's the count of unread emails, for example, if you're making a mail client. I know I am watching, Rich. And dynamic data was really just limited to .NET. I've not seen dynamic data or anything similar to it ported to any other runtime other than .NET. I'm a proponent for Blazor. I thought Blazor is great, but I also work day to day on a lot of web technologies. So for a lot of you UI guys, I'm probably a dirty web developer. So I'm back-end .NET, front-end JavaScript, TypeScript for the most part. And so Blazor is awesome, but Blazor is also really immature. There's not a lot of control libraries and all that kind of stuff yet. There will be over time. However, could I use this dynamic data knowledge today in my web development life? And I also have worked previously on the RxJS library itself. So I had some familiarity there. But I mean, for dynamic data, it's basically just, you have a collection, you have something in it. You put something in, you update a value, you can add someone out, you can add something else to there, update, and then you can also remove, and it kicks those items out. But with the source caches or the observable caches, is it's that those blue boxes there. Oh, those are really terrible colors. If someone's colorblind, I apologize. The bottom row of boxes are the current state, and the boxes above are the changes that have happened to that collection over time. So what I've built, I got a little demo app. I'll link to that here in just a minute. And that was just includes, so what I've taken dynamic data, all of the source cache. I didn't do any source list stuff for a few reasons. One, there's a lot of code in dynamic data. If you've ever looked at the source code, it is ridiculous. What Roland has done is fabulous and amazing, and I don't know if I could have written it myself. And I've gotten a much better appreciation for actually taking the code and porting it over. So focus on source cache because that's most relevant, I feel like, for a lot of scenarios, and source list may be something that comes in later. Also, JavaScript developers or I should say .NET developers are a lot more babied. That's a bad word for it, but we have a lot of great tools from the BCL, right? BCL gives us link, BCL gives us lists and collections and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't exist in the JavaScript world, right? We have filter, we have map, a few other operations that can go on lists, but nothing like link. They have the basics, the primitives. They have what's called an iterable, which is very similar to enumerable. And they have async iterable, which is analogous to async enumerable from the .NET space. However, the browsers themselves or Node.js or whoever don't give you link over top of those pieces. That's where third parties come in. So we're also utilizing IX.js, which is using the parts that we needed to do for array manipulation or list manipulation. Mainly because arrays in JavaScript don't have the idea of links. What's the word? Dang it, I should have wrote it down. Deferred, whatever. Enumeration, whatever. With the enumeration, so like you do a where, until you actually do toList or start enumerating, nothing has actually happened to your object, and IX is the same way. So you can start tacking on operators and it doesn't actually do anything until you say, yeah, give me a value from it. And then Signalr, which after watching Rich today is a very dirty word. He'd rather do server-side events, which I could have done server-side events here. I chose not to just because I wanted to explore some technologies as well. So I'm sure you've heard enough about Signalr today, but it's .NET, has JavaScript and Java clients as well for doing asynchronous bidirectional server-side updates. In this case, I'm really just looking for the real-time updates. My scenario is my server has a list of, in this case, the demo is heroes. So I've a list of superheroes that's on the server, and I want to present that list to all the clients that are connecting to that site. And then as they change, also modeling that back to all the clients at once. Signalr handled this. And then it's using Azure Signalr service as well as Azure Functions. So I'm trying the whole serverless concept. There's some good things, there's some bad things. I learned quite a bit, and that's why I did that. So let's go sort of look at some of the demo stuff. Let's find the link. Where are you? Where are you, Rodney? No, not Rodney.
I'm right here. Do you need me?
No. I just couldn't find the right page. Couldn't find the window on my screen because I'm crazy. All right, so actually that link won't work. So I'll go here. I'm gonna put this in chat. People feel free to bang on it and screw with it and break everyone. It's gonna be hilarious. So this is just a random list of superheroes. We can come in here, we can actually clear the list, and it's gonna start slowly taking them out, doing the kind of thing that you might want to do. So on the back end, this is, or sorry, on the front end, I should say, this is using Vue.js. Picked Vue because that's what I'm familiar with. So someone out there has clicked the random button, and so we've introduced some more heroes. I can click the random button, we can introduce some more. and then someone's gonna hit the clear button and it's gonna really fuck everything up, or screw everything up, excuse my French. But you can also come in here and you can start clicking on, yeah, someone hit remove, see? There we go. That was the whole idea of the demo. So I can come in here and I can say, all right, I want to take out all the Marvel Comics people or Arsenal or whatever this one is, and NBC. I mean, I found an API that just gives you back, like there's a list of 731 heroes or something. And I'm like, okay, cool, I'll use that. And so now on my client side, I can get all this data in here. And then also there is the concept of the tree, which doesn't actually work quite as well as I want. Oh, I have a debugger open somewhere. Haha. The control library I was using, because it's view 3 and for other reasons, there's supposed to be a little edit window that pops up. So if you go over here, you can actually make changes. So you can say, oh, I'm gonna change who their leader is or whatever. And so the leader is what's used in this concept for, and don't worry, I have a local version that you guys can't screw with. So in here, you can see that using the leader ID, we're using dynamic data's transform to tree method to actually just render out a tree based on that information. And this is all just happening in real time. All right, so I have my local version that you guys can't screw with, which is awesome. And this thing will work. So I can come in here and I can, move this person under Thor Girl. Random names are awesome. Wasn't you, Rich? Oh yeah, okay. I'm pretty sure it was. That's okay. So Captain Cold can go under, I don't know, Blood Wraith. That was right there above him. Drag and drop here would have been cool, but yeah. Just be lucky, this is what you got. So you can modify the leader in there. And then also, normally you might have a list like this, and your list of races or publishers or whatever might be stored on the server. But in this case, they're all just generated by dynamic data. So I can actually go in here and change Captain Cold's alignment, and now we have a new alignment that's popped in called Cold. I can save that and it'll update to everybody. And you have that information there. I'm still going to blame you, Rich. Doesn't matter if it's your fault or not. You're now the scapegoat, as it were. So let's get to some code. I mean, this is all cool. This is cool and all, but what does it look like? How do you actually work with it? That was the wrong button. All right, I know, text size. Working on it. All right. Is that big enough for everybody? Stuck around so far? All right, let's close all this stuff and actually start looking at things. So I have my hero model. There's some data there I'm not showing, mainly because I was a slacker and didn't really start doing this until this week to get all this stuff in there. So I just didn't show it in the UI because I was wanting functionality to work. But they have an ID, leader ID, superhero, publisher, blah, blah, blah. Nothing super special. The superhero API gives us this record. I just used a tool that transforms JSON to C#. And it's like, oh, cool. Yay. I'll have to work on it. So for Signalr, it has this concept of negotiating a hub. So this is just the plumbing to get Signalr to work with Azure Functions over the Azure Signalr service, which is actually, from a technical feat, is actually really kind of cool, because if no one actually touches your API or calls Signalr, they can still be connected to the Signalr service, but if they haven't made any calls to functions, the function app will just shut down. You're not paying anything for services or in terms of cost while it's shut down. Well, outside the usage of Signalr service. And then it'll automatically handle the connections and stuff like that. So here on connected, what I'm doing is I am querying Cosmos DB. This is just to get all of the heroes out. I set the max page size just for folks to sort of see that to 2, arbitrarily small number, because we're not dealing with a lot of data. And The reason I did that was just that when you click that random button and it starts bringing people in, it brings them in a little bit slower so you can sort of see what's going on. When it was like just fire hosing, it was like, oh, a bunch of things were added. It wasn't so helpful from a user's perspective, but for demo purposes, this makes a lot more sense. And what's really funny is once I did the serverless part, I didn't actually have dynamic data anymore. I was just using parts of dynamic data. So basically I have a list of changes and I just send that list of changes asynchronously across Signalr to the client as just a change set. So for the client, when they're seeing this, they're just getting the collection all at once, and we're just adding that in there. And then open the functions. And then here, this is where things get a little more interesting. So let's go to random hero. So this is where the random button comes into place. You click the random button, you send a count. Each page sends a slightly different count just for testing purposes. And we get we call to get our heroes so that we can build up a tree. So if there's no heroes, then we have no parent. We just generate a list. If there's not, then using that bogus tool that Rodney was using just allows you to simplify the logic of I want to randomly pick an item. This is mainly just because writing that code is tedious, and the tool was there. And so this is basically going to say, okay, for all the heroes that live in Cosmos DB, I'm not recommending you do this for production purposes because that would be bad. You're like, oh, I'm going to load all of the data into memory. Yeah, don't do that. But just for demo purposes, to build that nice little tree, we just go get all the heroes. And then we just use those to build the parents. And then once we're done, we do the same buffering. We use the max page size again of 2. So we just send these new heroes over. And then quickly, and I'll go to the actual JavaScript here in a minute. I'm sure you guys are like, yes, JavaScript. No, I don't think you really care about JavaScript. Yeah, it probably was a knock on the door. 1 second, I'm gonna mute for just a moment. All right, sorry about that. As my kid yells. Okay. Sorry about that. So this basically just posts the hero, and we just make changes to the hero, and we just call Signalr to spam out, in this case, the update. So in this case, because I'm stateless, I didn't actually have to deal with any of the dynamic data or source cache things that exist. However, in previous examples and stuff that I've done, you can have a source cache and connect to it, but usually it's for a stateless or a stateful service in some way, shape, or form. Oh, so you're not interested in JavaScript, you're interested in TypeScript. Well, that's good, because I have both. So I don't even know what pages I'm on. Here we go. There we go. All right, so this is using the Vue 3 syntax. So if you've used Vue, great. If not, don't worry about it. Basically, there's this setup method, which is very much like a constructor would be in reactive UI. Yeah, it really is. It is really very close to TypeScript. So this hub connection builder is for the Signalr. So this just allows us to connect to Signalr. These are Vue-specific things, even though they got reactive in the name. They're not observables by themselves. You can observe them, but they're a little different. So kind of like how I can't remember who it was, had the filter example earlier. This is a very similar concept. So we're trying to cross the streams, as it were, between two technologies. Vue is not centered around observables, so we're trying to bridge that gap slightly. So Vue has this concept of watching, so I can watch selected alignments, races, genders, etc. And then when that happens, we're just going to call this refilter method, or this refilter subject. And so it's just going to say, oh, we got a new item, trigger that behavior later on down the list. And then I have the started in here just to try to make it a little bit nicer. So if I could alt tab to the right thing, I mean, all that's doing is making sure the loader's there until we load the data the first time. So that's really what's going on here. So started is happening. If started is stopped. So RxJS is similar but not identical in terms of API to Rx.net. So there's no on next, it's just next or error or complete. And then in this case, there's also the is stopped. I think Rx.net has like it is disposed or something like that, or is completed maybe on subjects. So those are just different things, little idiosyncrasies between these different tools. But I mean, it has a very similar concept to observable create. You just do a new observable, you say what your type is. So this should be familiar to pretty much any C# developer. I mean, the only real difference is when you're making a function, your type goes on the right instead of the left. And then you're basically just writing C# that has no threads. I'm using Signalr core, Chris. But there's nothing specific to Signalr core in this example. So if you were using Signalr 2, you'd be fine as well. The only thing I had to do, and I might as well point it out while someone mentioned it, is startup. Yeah. So in this case, it is using Newtonsoft. Newtonsoft JSON. And I did have to create a couple converters. So I want to know, because I don't control change reason, that change reason thing lives in dynamic data, but I want to serialize it as a string because that's what I'm expecting on the JavaScript side. So this just ensures that there's a string converter for that, and then also optional as well. Doesn't have a default serializer. So this is just to make sure that optional is supported, which is a dynamic data type, and change reason. That was the only special things that had to happen. As long as you can serialize those over to JSON, you're fine. And so now here's where the actual dynamic data comes into. So if you haven't done RxJS, it's a little bit different. So if you're normally you might have an observable. So just say a new observable unknown.
Are we supposed to just like in here hesitate?
Sorry about that. My kids are like, what do we do with the food? I don't know. Put it on the table and eat it. We got dinner late tonight. So you have an observable, but we don't have select or map or filter or any of that on here. This used to exist in RxJS 5, but it was deprecated in 6 and removed. I mean, I think you can still add it, but the proper way to be idiomatic, I sort of need to back up here a little bit. So if you're familiar with any of the work that the .NET team is doing today with linking and trying to minimize the amount of assembly data that's used when you're deploying an application, JavaScript has a very similar problem. So it has its concept of modules, which I find are very analogous to assemblies. So every file essentially is an assembly. If from a .NET developer perspective, the best way to look at it is every file you have that has exports is an assembly that has public types, which means you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of assemblies. Is what it is. It's not .NET. But this is the easiest way to look at it. And so they have this concept of tree shaking, which is something they're trying to implement for .NET and try to shake out functions and methods and classes that you don't use. And so now based on the pieces of these modules that I've imported, it's going to shake out the rest. So I might have additional operators in here. So there's XOR, there's when reasons are. These are all dynamic data things that were converted over. So if I don't use these, when it goes to build my, I use air quotes, which you obviously can't see, when it goes to build the source code for going to production, it'll actually take all those methods out because they were never used in the source code. And so if you use the class-based syntax and you actually add things onto the class, tree shaking doesn't understand that it's not actually used. It's very difficult to understand that, where from a functional point of view, if you have values you're consuming into it, it makes it a little bit easier. So in this case, there's this pipe method. And then from the pipe method, you can take different operators, right? So we do have the filter operator. We do have the map operator. So filter is where in .NET's parlance, and map is select. But then there's also merge map. So that's select many. There's also concat map, which doesn't really exist in RxJS. Sorry, I can't remember who the speaker was earlier, who was doing the select concat, but that's basically just shorthand for select or concat. And that kind of stuff. And I'm not going to focus too much on the RxJS part. I'm more than willing to talk about that at another time if people want to know. But we have this pipe method, and so we can say I want to take that through and call transform. And so that's sort of a brief overview of how things are a little bit different. You have to look at it from a different angle. So let's go back down to our code here. So we create this observable, and this just takes in that change set. So if we go back to our function here, and then we got our import heroes, no, random heroes. All right, so this is sending a change set. So we grab all the changes, and we send them across as a change set. So we're just saying, okay, well, we know it's going to be a change set coming in. So we have that modeled. It's TypeScript interface. It looks exactly, okay, doesn't look exactly the same. It looks very similar to the .NET one. And then if I'm going too fast, just tell me and I'll try to slow down. And so we just take that and we throw it in here and just say next. And the nice thing is this as observable cache, this method here, takes in a source observable of change sets. So it doesn't really matter that this change set came from an observable pipe. All it needs to do is be a change set. And what that's going to do is it's going to turn that into an observable cache. So now there's a couple gotchas with JavaScript versus .NET. JavaScript is not easy. It's somewhat doable, but it's really not easy and super complicated to deal with equality. Most of the equality is reference equality, in that if it's the same object, they're equal. But value equality doesn't really exist. So some of these things had to add down like a deep equal. And so what this will do is this will do a deep equality check against both objects, which is expensive. But in some cases it may be needed. With observable cache, it doesn't seem to be so bad because it can use the key for most of it. It doesn't care about the value being the quote unquote the same thing. But this gives us our observable cache. Let's go look at that. So this observable cache extends a few things. I mean, these are basically what it does in dynamic data, if I recall. A couple special things in TypeScript. They have this concept of guards. So TypeScript is a duck-typed language, if you're not familiar with it, which basically means if it looks like a duck, sounds like a duck, I'm not going to assume it's a duck. It could be a goose. It may not necessarily sound the same as a duck, but it's the same kind of idea. And so sometimes you want to be able to, you have a thing that you don't know what it is. And you can do this, what they call type guards. So I can say, is this thing an observable cache? And it'll just say, yes, it is, or no, it's not. And then C# has recently added the new nullable typing, nullable type system. And it does a very similar kind of flow analysis. So if you say if is observable, you know what, I should just type this out and make it so that you can actually see what I'm talking about. All right, so if I say is observable cache, right? And then this is already an observable cache, but I can easily just cast this to any, and life will go to, I don't know, say string. Not sure that makes much sense, but inside here, we now know that cache, oh, it's still a string object. I make bad examples and then like, all right, so now outside of this if statement, it doesn't see this connect method as existing. Where inside this if statement it does. So these are the casts are very similar to the TypeScript or the C# ones. You can do an as cast if you're not familiar, and then there's also the Angular bracket one, which is really out of favor due to React and TSX or JSX syntax, which I'm not going to go into. All right, so observable cache, we got to connect to it. This is the same rules as anything. And I'm just gonna add something else in here so it doesn't mess with me. Auto formatting and all that. So transform. So another thing, TypeScript doesn't have, or sorry, JavaScript, or in those runtimes, don't have a support for the concept of I notify property changed. Not native support anyway. There's no interface that you can implement and be like, I can now watch the properties of things. So to support that, we have this concept, the JavaScript, the modern runtime. So as long as you don't need to target IE11, God forbid, it's going away soon. But if you have to target IE11, some of these things won't work for you. I'm sorry, I'm not even going to try to support it. If you're targeting modern web browsers, you have access to this thing called a proxy, which I wish .NET had. So this proxy, I can pass in an object if I could type. And then in that object, I can actually create overload or interceptors essentially. So what this will do is whenever I take this object and I want to get a value off of that object, this method will be called. And I will have the opportunity to change the behavior of that method, which is very similar to interceptors in .NET, which usually require a lot of runtime support and other weird things, which is why we don't use them a whole ton. Outside unit testing, everyone unit tests here, right? I hope everyone does. So using proxies, we're able to emulate the behavior of property notify changed. And so if your object doesn't already have that, you can just call this observe property changes on it, which is just behaving as if you're passing in a delegate, very similar to that. And what this does is this takes an object and an object of type T and creates it as a notified property changed object of type T, which just has this notify property change symbol. Symbols are kind of like specially named properties, I guess. Trying to figure out the best way to, they're not strings, but they're not private. It's weird. But anyway, which is where we can actually get our property change values from. Auto refresh was talked about earlier today. So this is the same kind of support. So it takes that observable property changed. So if you pass it something that's not, it may get mad at you or may not. It'll definitely fail at runtime. So I should maybe try to fix the typings on that. Publish ref count, that's nothing new. And now filter. So we have our dynamic filter here. There are 2 filters now instead of 1. And the reason for that is because .NET's support for overloading is a lot more, what's the word? I don't even know well, in .NET you can have overloaded methods, which are actually 2 different methods. In JavaScript and TypeScript, you can have a method that has multiple signatures. However, you have to be able to figure out what those values are from the signature. And so sometimes it's easier just to split things. At least with a lot of the dynamic data methods, it made a lot more sense to just have them split. That way your brain didn't have, or my brain, not your brain, my brain didn't have to do nearly as many gymnastics. So this does the dynamic filter. We take our hero in here. Because we're not pre-populating selected alignments, we don't know what they are until we get our list. We pretend that undefined is true. If you're not familiar with JavaScript and undefined versus null, then there's some fun stuff in there. But basically, undefined is not null. Null is not undefined, and they are two very different, distinct things. But basically what happens is when you checkbox, it sets it to false, and then a check it back, it'll check it to true. So this is just allowing us to check for both sides. The sort comparison stuff, this was actually kind of cool that I got this to work. So this actually has Intellisense based on the incoming type. So you don't have to do very much magic. So if I wanted to filter by real name, I could do that. But I'm going to do by name because it makes more sense. And then finally bind. So there's no excuse me, there's no output variables. So this looks a little bit different than the RxJS you're normally used to. But basically what this does is on this ref object, which this is just a view construct, there's a property called value, which is the array value of it. And so we're just binding to the array and modifying the array in place. And in this case, view is smart enough to understand that that's changing. And then for our list, uh-oh, what did I do? Oh no, identifier, oh, I didn't save. That'd be why. And then for our list, right, we got our genders, alignments, races, all that kind of stuff. We actually just can now take our list and transform it and say, okay, I want to grab the alignments, I want all of the distinct alignments, I'm going to sort them and then bind them to this alignments. Same thing. And so we now have all that data pumped out. Unmount is on deactivated, I guess, in RxJS sense. And then promises or tasks, if you're not familiar with promises. They are tasks that you can't cancel. Go figure. And then also selected heroes just over here for stuff I was adding in. So if I wanted to, I can go in here and take out, say, distinct values. So what this is going to do is go and be like, oh, we got a lot of values. They're all going to uncheck and check it the same because, or maybe not. That's awesome. That's neat. But let's put that back because that was really confusing. Let's see what else. My brain is broken. Oh, let's go to the tree. The tree is the next interesting one. Yes, yes. Okay, so trees set up exactly the same way. We have our list of our heroes in their node list, right? So this node is the dynamic data, same as node. Promises or tasks is asking for trouble. How's it asking for trouble? They are very much the same. The only difference is there are no threads in JavaScript and you cannot cancel promises today. It's not entirely true. They're trying to work on it, but they don't have the concept of a cancellation token today. There is the abort controller that's coming, but it's not done yet. Anyway, node has an item as a key, has parent, children, all that fun stuff. And I've totally changed files, clicked the wrong button. So this is set up the same way. We got our started, observer, pump all the data through. But now here, we first sort the list by name, and then we put it in the hero list. And this is probably not super efficient to do this sort after sorting, but I needed to for my sanity. So if I go here, I'll show you why. So if I click on one of these and I go click on leader, this list was not alphabetical and was really driving me nuts. So that was just a convenience thing. And so we bind that list. It binds it to the array here. And then we can sort by leader ID, then name, so that we're sorting alphanumerically by the leader. And then we call transform to tree, which is a method that exists in dynamic data today, which is really cool. So it produces this whole tree structure that allows us to now have these things anchored. And so if we click on that and go to array, right, we can now move that data. And dynamic data knows to take the item from where it exists and move it to where it needs to go. And I didn't have to do any of that. I don't know about you guys. I've written tree stuff in the past and wanted to gouge my eyes out when someone's like, well, what if I do this? And it's like, no, it doesn't work that way. In this case, dynamic data knows just everything and it manages it for you. And so I can show that component off because it's not super complicated. So we have I'm using these fast components just because I couldn't find a view library that was updated for 3 yet, because 3 came out this week, I guess. So this just renders the tree with the click event. That's where things sort of broke on the production side, which I didn't notice until about 40 minutes ago, or no, an hour ago. And then we have this node tree, which is this guy here. And so we have our little avatar, 24 by 24. You know, I can change that if I want, just to prove I'm not lying, right, Rodney? No lies.
You're most likely lying.
Probably. And then what this does is it actually takes itself and I guess it's based on the name. I don't really actually know why it does that, but it works. So it actually recurses with itself as there's children. And so the only thing really you have to do is, because dynamic data node doesn't have a list of children, it has an observable cache of children. So dynamic data will update the caches as data moves around. And so you just have to connect and bind it. So in my case, I just connected and bound it to an array of children. I didn't do any sorting or anything like that, but you certainly could. And then when we're done, we unmount. And so this just materializes the list of children for each thing as it goes. If you want to be more efficient, you can make sure that the tree was visible and connect when it's visible, hide when it's not, you know, those kind of things. But that is my demo. As far as the demo code, it does exist. I'll put this in the chat real quick. Feel free to go rip it off and mess with it. I don't think I have any of my secrets in there, but doesn't matter. I'm going to delete the resources in a week or two.
That's Microsoft GitHub user in your.
Oh no, that's a good question. Why do I have a micro? I don't know. Insights. Contributors. Where'd that come from? Committed something. I have no idea. It must have been like a.
Just hit the one commit. You can tell. Think about this previous version.
Oh, I bet you. Maybe I put a secret in there and it didn't like that. Commits. Oh, that's what it is. So I set this up as an Azure Static Web App, the original one. And so there's a little guide in the Azure portal that says, point me to the repository. So it does it. It did it there. But yeah, that's what it was. That was kind of interesting. I was like, what's that? So yeah, feel free to grab any of this code. The actual dynamic data, that lives over here. It is published on NPM. I'm going to try to keep working on it. I don't know if this is something that you want to roll under the Reactive UI banner or not, but it is something I'm playing with. I was working on documentation. Maybe. Let me see. Real quick on my terminal window. Help me, type doc. I don't know what I'm doing. So I was going to work on trying to get some documentation out there, which isn't right now. It was on my list, and then I got behind. But I do want to start to get some documentation out there. So there's API documentation available for folks to see what operators and methods and all that kind of stuff exists. Because one thing, basically all I did from a source perspective was take all the dynamic data code and copy it, all the CS files in, and then changed one to .ts and fixed all of the errors, and then did the same thing over and over and over again. If you're a masochist like me, that's great. If you're not a masochist like me, you'd probably claw your eyes out. But the advantage of that is all of the comments that existed in dynamic data are also here, because I just pulled them right over.
Pretty cool.
Awesome, David. Thank you.
It was really interesting to see how Roland has put everything together, because a lot of these operators use the same operators inside themselves. It's really interesting. Internals.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions from the audience? I'll check YouTube as well quickly.
So if the audience doesn't have a question, I do have a question.
You're the audience.
Fair enough. But I get a microphone, so I get to ask my question directly. So, okay, you go from, hey, there's this really cool C# library to I'm going to port it into a different language. What does that undertaking feel like? Yeah.
What is that? Sorry, I missed part of that. My daughter was.
Like, what does that undertaking feel like? Like you're like, I mean, because, okay, like just consuming dynamic data kind of broke my brain for a couple of weeks, if not more, probably more, about a month at least. And here you are, you saw it when I showed it to you, you were like, oh, that's amazing. And then, 2 days later, it's just like, oh, hey, I'm going to port it to JavaScript. And it's just like, kind of, I know this is kind of like a softer question, but, why did you want it that badly? Like, what was it that it brought to the table that you couldn't do with what tools you had in the JavaScript community?
So from my perspective, there's nothing like it that solves the problem as, I'm not going to say as effectively or efficiently, because I'm not sure. I haven't done testing. But as, what's the word? Shoot.
Elegantly?
Elegantly. Thank you, Rich. You're reading my mind. It doesn't solve the problem quite as elegantly as this does. I have some real world problems at work where I have a large stateful list and or tree that I'd like to be able to surface in the UI. And since our UIs are all JavaScript, at least where I work right now, it made it a hell of a lot more powerful to have something like this be able to be used for that, as opposed to trying to roll it myself and running into all the different bugs. Where something like dynamic data, not only is it elegant, it also has a whole suite of tests behind it that we can also validate. So I didn't just, copy the code and say, oh, good, I'm done. I copied the tests too and converted all the tests. So this has a full suite of all the relevant tests. So some pieces don't exist in here, like full joins. I didn't do some of the join stuff yet. I left the files in place just so I have a point of reference. But really it was just, okay, well now here's all the tests in idiomatic, I want to say idiomatic JavaScript, but it's more idiomatic Jasmine or Jest in this case. So, I converted all the tests to make sure that not only did I convert the code, but that I was working code. And I can trust that the code works, at least with a slightly higher level of degree than I would normally do in a project where it's like, I just need to paint it on the page quickly.
Awesome.
I'm with you on that, Rich. It is something to learn. That's another point. I just thought it was cool, and I like to dig in.
Anyway, Richard's not going to get his way with maps versus filters. It's going link style, but that'll be fun.
Go ahead, Rich. I don't mind.
Okay, yeah, I've been doing a fair bit of this recently, mostly the other way around. Well, two directions actually. And I've been working on shifting JavaScript libraries to C#, or at least to JS interop with C# APIs over the top, which means you have to get into the library and really understand what it's doing at every particular stage. And the other way that I've been doing it is to, I've been writing my own compiler for cross-compiler, basically, F# to JavaScript, so that there's a version of Blazor that you guys may know about. It's called Bolero, which is basically just an F# version of Blazor. It does everything that Blazor does in F#. It uses Elmish syntax. And I felt that since F# cross-compiles across to JavaScript fairly easily, it would be nice if we could do all the JS interop stuff, but keep it in F#. And that, honestly, as a learning experience, either for the particular libraries or for the compilers that you're working with, I don't think you can beat it. It does take a lot of time and it does take a lot of effort, but I definitely call it worthwhile.
Yeah, and for myself, it was just, can I do it? Will it be doable? That was my other thing. It's like, oh, cool. I was able to do it, but it was a lot of code.
Yeah, a very big thing for me is where I look at something and go, ooh, I wonder if I can, and then I find out.
It's like, oh, I can, but there's like 500,000 lines of code. Oh, let's not do that just yet.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Anyway, thanks for coming, everyone.